بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So this is the 25th lesson, lesson number 25 in our series on the book Al-Uboodiyyah by Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, with the commentary of Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan. And over the previous few lessons we began to discuss the attachment of the heart to the material things of the world, such as money, the dinar or the dirham, or such as items of luxury and clothing, and in general anything that any and all material things that people tend to become attached to. So we discussed that, and then we moved on to the issue of ar-rizq, which is sustenance. And it was mentioned that sustenance is not the same as the material things that the heart can become attached to, because sustenance is a necessity, a vital necessity. So the fact that the heart pursues and has a desire, has a qasd, and has a tama', an aspiration for, and it seeks and desires and pursues, then this is not blameworthy in and of itself, because it is a necessity. However, there is an aspect to it, which is that a person should be honorable and dignified and place his reliance upon Allah and take the means, and not to ask of the people, and not to fall into begging and asking of the people and expecting or anticipating that other people are going to fulfill your needs and bring your needs to you, and be reliant upon other people, and to always be asking and so on and so forth. This is not honorable, and this again would lead to a person becoming attached to other people, expecting his needs to be fulfilled by other people, and then his pleasure and his displeasure, his pleasure and his anger, it will then start to revolve around these types of issues, right? So this again leads to a person to, becoming attached, and, the heart now starts becoming enslaved to others besides Allah Azza wa Jal. So that was discussed as well. And then after that, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah went on to mention even in the issue of the heart's attachment to a husband or a wife, because this itself is lawful, but there can be situations and scenarios wherein the heart of a man, even though he appears to be the husband and the one in charge, his heart is captivated by the woman, and in reality she is the one who is in charge. So this is something that, even though it is in relation to something that is lawful, it is nevertheless an instance of ubudiyyah, or enslavement or captivation in one form or another, and that is obviously blameworthy. And after mentioning this, Ibn Taymiyyah then says, if this is the case even in a situation where it is to do with something that is lawful, right? Because the relationship between a man and his wife and vice versa is a lawful relationship. And even in that relationship, there can, occur a type of captivation that is unhealthy, and, it becomes harmful because it starts moving in the direction of a type of servitude and captivation. So after that, the final point that Ibn Taymiyyah finished on, and which we finished our previous lesson on, is that he said that this, what we are discussing, the issue of the heart, the fact that the issue of the heart, freedom is the freedom of the heart, and servitude is the servitude of the heart. Everything revolves around the heart. That if this is in relation to a type of captivation of the heart in something which is lawful, meaning between a man and a woman in marriage, then how about the one whose heart is captivated in relation to things which are actually unlawful, which are haram, right? In relation to women who are unlawful for him. And this is a type of punishment, right? This is the statement that we finished with in the previous lesson. So continuing today's lesson, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, وَهَؤُلَاءِ مِنْ أَعْظَمِ النَّاسِ عَذَابًا وَأَقَلِّهِمْ ثَوَابًا. These types of people now, this is now another category of people that we are speaking about, which is a type of people who are attached to unlawful things, and their hearts become captivated, by that which is unlawful. He says that they are the greatest of people in terms of punishment, and the least of them in being rewarded, right? Because of the nature of their heart, it is captivated and enslaved by way of those things which are unlawful. So he says, فَإِنَّ الْعَاشِقَ لِسُورَةٍ إِذَا بَقِيَ قَلْبُهُ مُتَعَلِّقًا بها مستعبدا لها اجتمع له من أنواع الشر والفساد ما لا يحصيه إلا رب العباد ولو سلم من فعل الفاحشة الكبرى. He says, this is because a person who becomes infatuated, right? His heart becomes engrossed and infatuated by way of a representation, meaning of a woman, or something that his lusts and desires pursue. Then his heart remains attached to it and becomes captivated by it, and then he will be surrounded by various types of evil and corruption as a result of that unhealthy attachment of the heart to something which is unlawful. And there will be such harms and evils that will come to him that no one can enumerate them all, no one knows them all, except the Lord of all of the servants. And even if he did not actually fall into what he calls al-fahishatul kubra, which is the actual act, the actual unlawful act, which in this case would be zina. So even if he doesn't fall into the greatest fahisha, then the heart's attachment will lead him to so many other surrounding evils and forms of corruption that will be like a type of constant punishment upon him. So upon this, Sheikh Salih Al-Fawzan, he says that these people who are infatuated with representations and pictures and the likes, then they will be in a constant type of punishment. Meaning that to be in this state and to have one's heart captivated and enslaved in this manner is a type of punishment itself, because of what the heart has to endure and what it has to go through, and because of the associated evils and corruption that come along or are attached to that type of situation. And so that this is why you find that people whose hearts are engrossed and captivated and infatuated with certain things relating to lust and desires, they would be happy to engage in other crimes and other evils in order to fulfill the heart's desire. And this is something in general, that when it comes to, by way of example, let's say, intoxication, alcohol, drugs, you'll see people become addicted, and then they are willing to engage in crime. They will cheat, they will rob, they will steal, just to, for that moment of pleasure and that high. And so similarly, in the same way, The same applies here, in that a whole range of other evils and a whole range of other forms and types of corruption will appear, will be present, whenever you have a heart which is like this. So Shaykh al-Fawzan, he says that the reason for this, he goes on to mention the speech of Ibn Taymiyyah that we just mentioned, and he says that the cause of all of this is because of the attachment of the heart to these types of forms and representations. And this is something that in our time we see that it's something that the people are subjected to. It's a great trial, and you find it in the various lands by way of satellites and the internet and newspapers and magazines and all the television and all of these types of gatherings and conferences, and where you find this type of mixing and intermingling between the men and the women, and women are displaying their beauty and so on and so forth. All of this is a means and trials of tribulation by which the hearts become attached. And the Shaykh goes on to say that all of this has stirred the shahwa between the men and the women, and the trial and the tribulation has increased in its severity. And we see that the akhlaq, the types of behaviors which are from the gharb, from the West, and from the kafara, from the disbelievers, we see that this is now spread amongst the Muslims, like those types of behaviors and qualities and traits and so on and so forth. And the Shaykh goes on to say, speaking about the point made by Ibn Taymiyyah, that sometimes a person might be attached in such a way that this attachment continues without him ever committing the actual act of zina, right? So, and so this is actually worse. It's a worse situation to be in than to actually commit the deed, to do that which, to do the unlawful deed, and then to feel remorse and then to repent. Because, as Ibn Taymiyyah says, وَلَوْ سَلِمَ مِنْ فِعْلِ الْفَاحِشَةِ الْكُبْرَى فَدَوَامُ تَعَلُّقِ الْقَلْبِ بِهَا بِلَا فِعْلِ الْفَاحِشَةِ أَشَدُّ ضَرَرًا عَلَيْهِ ممن يفعل ذنبا ثم يتوب منه ويزول أثره من قلبه. So he says that for the heart to be continuously attached without actually doing the fahisha, without doing the actual deed, this is more harmful upon him than it's a more severe situation than the one who actually does and falls into the sin, and then he repents from it. He makes tawbah to Allah Azza wa Jal, and then the effect of that evil then is removed from his heart. It ends from his heart, right? So in other words, a person who is attached to something in this manner which is unlawful, and his heart is captivated and infatuated, and in that state it draws so many other evils and harms and corruptions. All of this is like a type of punishment upon that person, an ongoing punishment upon that person. This is a worse situation to be in than if the person had actually committed an evil deed, had fallen into the act of, in this case it is obviously a zina, and he then felt remorse, and then he made tawbah to Allah Azza wa Jal, and then he removed the effect of it from his heart, right? This person is in a better situation, because that lingering attachment and captivation and enslavement and infatuation is no longer present in the heart, because he's resolved it by way of tawbah and repentance and ikhlas and turning to Allah. And so the effect of it now has gone. And so this is what Ibn Taymiyyah says in his text. And Shaykh al-Fawzan says, he elaborates upon this, that as for when, whatever he's attached to, it remains in his heart all the time, then he continues in a type of, this is like a type of punishment. It's a type of struggle, and it brings other evils around with it. And this is even worse, as the Shaykh says, وَهَذَا أَشَدُّ مِمَّنْ وَقَعَ فِي الْفَاحِشَةِ. This is worse than the one who actually falls into the fahisha, because that person, his desire for it will end. He repents to Allah Azza wa Jal, and the attachment and the association finishes. It's cut off. Whereas that other person, his heart never ceases to be captivated, enslaved, infatuated, and so that's why this is a greater evil. And then Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he mentions some lines of poetry which elaborate upon this meaning. And one of them is the saying of the poet, سُكْرُ حَوًا وَسُكْرُ مُضَامَةٍ وَمَتَى إِقَافَةُ مَنْ بِهِ سُكْرَانٍ. So the meaning, the general meaning of this statement is that there is the intoxication of desire, of the hawa, and there is the intoxication of, like alcohol, of khamar, which basically, it affects the body, and, affects the mind, the cognitive functions, right? There's these two types of intoxication. And when will the one who is intoxicated become sober? And the meaning of this is that intoxication is of two types. One that relates to the body, right? So this is alcohol. Obviously, you consume alcohol and it affects your ability to think and reason, and likewise your ability to control your speech and behavior. It affects you in that way. And this is something that comes and it goes, right? The effects of it will wear off after a number of hours or by the morning, and you'll be back to normal again. This intoxication isn't something that remains with you. However, the other type of intoxication is that of the heart. And obviously that of the heart is something that remains with you. It doesn't go tomorrow or in a few hours, because so long as your heart is attached and infatuated to a thing amongst the things, in this case obviously it's to do with a relationship, and that which is unlawful, then this is something that remains. And when the two of them are combined together, when you combine these two types of intoxication together, so now it is not only intoxication of the heart, but also of the mind and the body by way of consuming alcohol or intoxicants, then this now makes it even worse. It compounds the whole thing. So this is the first line of poetry that Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, that he mentioned. And then he mentions another line of poetry in which the poet, he said, جُنِنْتَ بِمَنْ تَهْوَى فَقُلْتُ لَهُمْ الْإِشْقُ أَعْظَمُ مِمَّا بِالْمَجَانِينَ الْإِشْقُ لَا يَسْتَفِيقُ الدَّهْرَ صَاحِبُهُ وَإِنَّمَا يُسْرَعُ الْمَجْنُونُ فِي الْحِينِ. So the meaning of this, in a roundabout way, the meaning of this is basically to say that this type of ishq, which is a type of infatuation, is more severe than madness, than being insane. And this is because the one who is infatuated, he never becomes sober. He never comes back and regains his, the soundness of his mind, because his heart is attached in a way that, it won't leave him. Whereas the one who is majnoon, the one who has a fit of insanity or a bout of insanity or something like that, then, occasionally he regains his sanity, he regains his composure, But the ashiq, the one who is infatuated with a type of love and, attachment and infatuation, then he never becomes sober. He never becomes sober. His intoxication is continuous in this way, right? So here, what Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala is pointing out, that, he first of all mentioned that within a relationship that is lawful between a man and a woman, between a husband and a wife, there can be a type of captivation and enslavement that a man can fall into, where he is the actual, the husband, but in reality his heart is captivated and enslaved, and she is the one who is truly and really in charge, right? And who commands him, and who, right? This can happen in that type of lawful situation, lawful relationship, but it can also happen in relation to that which is haram and unlawful. And so those people whose hearts are attached in that way and infatuated with things which are unlawful for them, then this is a type of punishment, and it is very, very severe, and it is worse than being intoxicated in the body, in terms of alcohol and, other types of physical harms that a person might bear. This type of intoxication of the heart and enslavement of the heart is very severe. And it is something that continues, in which a person finds very hard to leave. Then Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, he explains what the reason is for people falling into these types of affairs. He says, وَمِنْ أَعْظَمِ أَسْبَابِ هَذَا الْبَلَاءِ إِعْرَاضُ الْقَلْبِ عَنِ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّ الْقَلْبَ إِذَا ذَاقَ طَعْمَ عِبَادَةِ اللَّهِ وَإِخْلَاصٍ لَهُ لم يكن عنده شيء قط أحلى من ذلك ولا ألذ ولا أطيب. He says, from the greatest of causes of this type of tribulation is the heart turning away from Allah. For indeed, the heart, when it tastes the sweetness of worshipping Allah and sincerity to Him, then there is nothing that is sweeter to the heart than that, meaning than the worship of Allah and being sincere to Him. And nor is there anything more delicious and more wholesome than that. So in other words, when the heart singles out Allah in worship and is sincere to Him and is occupied in that, this will be the most tastiest, the most delicious, the most beautiful thing that the heart will experience. And it won't turn to anything else. But every time the heart turns away from Allah, turns away from worshipping Him, turns away from being sincere to Him, right? And it turns away and away, then obviously something else has got to fill the heart. Something else will take the place of that. And so this is one of the main reasons as to why a heart becomes infatuated and becomes enslaved to to other things besides Allah Azza wa Jal, from the affairs, from the numerous affairs of this world. So then Ibn Taymiyyah continues, وَالْإِنسَانُ لَا يَتْرُكُ مَحْبُوبًا إِلَّا بِمَحْبُوبٍ آخَرٍ يَكُونُ أَحَبُّ إِلَيْهِ مِنْهُ أَوْ خَوْفًا مِنْ مَكْرُوهٍ. So he says, a person does not abandon a beloved thing except on account of another thing which is beloved to him, which is more beloved to him than that thing, or on account of fear, that he fears something. So in other words, what Ibn Taymiyyah is saying here, that if there is something that you love, in this case it is, let's say it is Allah Azza wa Jal and His Tawheed and Ikhlas to Him, you would not abandon that for something else unless that thing was more beloved to you. And so this shows, or the point that Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah is making, is that this type of trial and tribulation of the heart being attached to other things and infatuated with other things, then the cause of that is the heart turning away from Allah, who is the most beloved thing, to other things. And it means that the heart has been infatuated and attached and begins to love other things, these material things, which then lead to a competition in the heart. A competition between the love which is being directed to Allah and the love which is being directed to these other things, whether they are lawful or unlawful. And so eventually what happens, that the heart's love for these other things besides Allah, it overwhelms and it dominates. And these things then become more beloved. And so this now starts entering into a dangerous territory where the heart becomes, captivated in this manner. And this is something that actually happens to people. This is something that happens to people. They get put to trial in their religion, in their worship, in their ikhlas, in their tawheed, in terms of how they allow themselves to become so attached to certain things that it puts them to trial in their religion in this way. And he says, فَالْحُبُّ الْفَاسِدِ إِنَّمَا ينصرف القلب عنه بالحب الصالح أو بالخوف من الضرر. So then Ibn Taymiyyah says, this type of corrupt love is the heart moves away from it by way of righteous love. A type of love that is wholesome, that is correct, that is righteous. This is how you turn away the heart from this corrupt and evil type of love, which leads to the heart's infatuation. Or by you fearing the harm that might come about on account of this corrupt type of love which is in your heart. And so this leads us to the discussion of Yusuf alayhi salam, because this is the perfect example of what we are discussing, of the whole the issue that Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala is discussing at this point. The story of Yusuf alayhi salam, in which Allah Azza wa Jal, he says, كَذَلِكَ لِنَصْرِفَ عَنْهُ السُّوءَ وَالْفَحْشَاءَ إِنَّهُ مِنْ عِبَادِنَا الْمُخْلَصِينَ. So he mentions this ayah, which obviously he's going to speak about, which is alludes to the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. And Sheikh Salih al-Fawzan, he elaborates upon this, and so we'll go through what he mentions. He says, the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal regarding Yusuf alayhi salam, وَكَذَلِكَ كَذَلِكَ لِنَصْرِفَ عَنْهُ السُّوءَ وَالْفَحْشَاءَ إِنَّهُ مِنْ عِبَادِنَا الْمُخْلَصِينَ. Thus did we turn him away from evil, from su and al-fahsha. Indeed, he is from our purified or sincere servants. So what happened is that Yusuf alayhi salam, when the woman or the wife of Al-Aziz, the wife of that ruler, tried to tempt him and tried to draw him to, to fall into something which is unlawful, Yusuf alayhi salam, he said, مَعَاذَ اللَّهِ إِنَّهُ رَبِّي أَحْسَنَ مَثْوَايَ إِنَّهُ لَا يُفْلِحُ الظَّالِمُونَ. He said, refuge is with Allah. He's my Lord. Then he went on to say that, indeed Allah does not allow the wrongdoers to prosper. So he fled from her. And then she followed him. And what happened is that she tried to grab him by way of his thobe, and she grabbed him from behind. And what happened is that there was a split, in his thobe, because he was turning away from her. And then when her husband, the ruler, Al-Aziz, when he happened to come and he saw what was happening, she then made the accusation against Yusuf alayhi salam. She turned the accusation against him. And so she said to her husband, مَا جَزَاءُ مَنْ أَرَادَ بِأَهْلِكَ سُوءًا إِلَّا أَنْ يُسْجَنَ أَوْ عَذَابٌ عَلِيمٌ. So she said to him, what is the the recompense? What is the punishment for the one who desires evil with your family, except that he should be imprisoned or be given a painful punishment? So this was now the plot of this, the wife of Al-Aziz. And however, Allah Azza wa Jal, He saved Yusuf alayhi salam from her evil and from her plot because of his sincerity to Allah Azza wa Jal. And at the end of the story, when it became clear that Yusuf alayhi salam was innocent, and she herself, the wife of Al-Aziz, was forced to admit, she said, الآن حسحس الحق أنا راودته عن نفسه وإنه لمن الصادقين. She said that now the truth has become apparent, and I am the one who tempted him, tempted him from his soul, and indeed he is from the truthful ones. So she acknowledged her error, and she said, وَمَا أُبَرِّئُ نَفْسِي إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَّارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ إِلَّا مَا رَحِمَ رَبِّي إِنَّ رَبِّي غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. That she then began to say that about the soul, and how the soul, it is something that incites to evil, except for those whom my Lord shows mercy. Indeed, my Lord is forgiving and merciful. So you see here at the end of the story, she acknowledged her error and her mistake, and Allah Azza wa Jal saved Yusuf alayhi salam from the plot of this woman and the other women that she had gathered together. And that's because she had said to the other women that when she tried initially, وَلَقَدْ رَاوَدْتُهُ عَنْ نَفْسِهِ فَاسْتَعْصَمَ, that I had tried to entice him, but then he fortified himself. وَلَئِن لَمْ يَفْعَلْ مَا آمَرُهُ لَيُسْجَنَنَّ وَلَيَكُونَ مِنَ الصَّاغِرِينَ. And if he does not do that which I command him, then he will indeed be punished, or he will be one of the, he'll be turned or made to be one of the lowly ones. So from this story, the whole of this story, Shaykh al-Fawzan says that the tribulation of women is a mighty tribulation and also a painful tribulation. And part of what contributes these types of tribulation from arising is the issue of this mixing between the men and the women. And especially, the Shaykh goes on to explain, in this time in which the women have basically abandoned and left the adab of the Sharia, the ways and the guidance that the Sharia has come as to how the women ought to behave. And unfortunately, they've been left to they've been left to allow the Western influences to come upon them, and for them to leave off the hijab and leave off the modest behaviors and these kind of things. All these barriers have gone, and they've lost that shyness, and instead we see in all boldness, there's free mixing between men and women, and all of the protective barriers that there would be between men and women, they've now been removed. They have been eroded and removed, and this is part and parcel of the reason why tribulations have appeared. So Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he says, فَاللَّهُ يَصْرِفُ عَنْ عَبْدِهِ مَا يَسُوءُهُ مِنَ الْمَيْلِ إِلَى الصُّوَرِ وَالتَّعَلُّقِ بِهَا. That Allah Azza wa Jal, He is the one who turns His servant, He is the one who turns His servant away from that which will bring him harm and evil, from being inclined towards, a surah, meaning pictures, and meaning here women, and the recollection of that in the mind and being attached to that, and the heart being attached to that. It is Allah Azza wa Jal who saves the servant. وَيَصْرِفُ عَنْهُ الْفَحْشَاءِ بِإِخْلَاصِهِ لِلَّهِ. and he is the one who turns him away from al-fahsha, which is evil, by way of his sincerity to him. So Shaykh al-Fawzan continues to explain this, and he basically says that Yusuf alayhi salam, the son of Yaqub, the son of Ishaq, the son of Ibrahim alayhi salam, whatever happened to him of trial and tribulation that Allah Azza wa Jal has mentioned in that entire chapter, we see that there are many different types of trials and tribulations that Yusuf alayhi salam went through. He was put to trial. First of all, he was taken from his father. He was separated from his father. Then he was thrown into a ditch and into a well, and then he was sold into slavery and turned into a servant in the palace of the king. And then when he reached his youthful age, he was beautiful. Allah gave him beauty, and he was handsome. Then the woman, the wife of Al-Aziz, then put him to trial, by way of what she did, and then she had him threatened to have him imprisoned, and so on and so forth. And all of this was a test and a trial and a tribulation. So these are the affairs that Yusuf alayhi salam was put through, and Allah Azza wa Jal saved him from that because of his ikhlas, and because of that moment of ikhlas, then Allah Azza wa Jal turned the evil and the harm away from him. And the point being from all of this story, as Shaykh al-Fawzan says, is that Allah Azza wa Jal described Yusuf alayhi salam as innahu min ibadina al-mukhlasin, that he was indeed from our pure and sincere servants. And because he showed that moment of sincerity and fear of Allah, at that moment in time when she, closed the door and tempted him, and, in that moment, and nobody else was there, and in that moment he showed that sincerity and fear of Allah, then Allah Azza wa Jal saved him and also exonerated him as well from the claim that was made against him by the wife of Al-Aziz. So, as Shaykh al-Fawzan says, that فَضَلَّ عَلَى مَنْ أَخْلَصَ لِلَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يُنْجِيهِ, that indeed it shows that Allah, the one who shows sincerity to Allah Azza wa Jal, then Allah will indeed, He will save him. And that this is a general ruling. This is a general ruling. فَهَذَا تَعْلِيلٌ عَامٌ فَكُلُّ مَنْ أَخْلَصَ لِلَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ وَعَبَدَ اللَّهِ حَقَّ عِبَادَتِهِ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يُخْلِصُهُ فِي الشَّدَائِدِ. That anyone who is sincere to Allah Azza wa Jal and worships Allah as he truly should be worshipped, then indeed Allah will save him and help him in times of difficulty, in times of hardship. And then Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala, he continues and he says, وَلِهَذَا يكون قبل أن يذوق حلاوة العبودية لله والإخلاص له تغلبه نفسه على اتباع هواها، فإذا ذاق طعم الإخلاص وقوي في قلبه انقهر له هواه بلا علاج. He says, Ibn Taymiyyah says here, for this reason, before a person can taste the sweetness of worshipping Allah and sincerity to Him, what will happen is that his soul will overwhelm him and, basically incite him to follow its desire. And when he tastes the sweetness of sincerity to Allah and his heart becomes strong by way of that sincerity, then his desire will be subdued without anything else being necessary. Right? In other words, what Ibn Taymiyyah is saying is that when the soul entices you and incites you and tries to dominate you with its hawa, with its desire, and then you have a moment of sincerity, in that time, in that moment, in the heart, you have a moment of sincerity to Allah Azza wa Jal, and you feel the sweetness of that being sincere to Allah, and that itself will cause the heart to be strong, and it will subdue that desire and overcome that desire without anything else being necessary. In other words, pure ikhlas to Allah Azza wa Jal. That itself will dominate and subdue the desire. And so this is what saved Yusuf alayhi salam in that moment of trial and tribulation. So this then leads on to another issue, which is alongside ikhlas, alongside this sincerity that we've now clearly seen, is a way of saving oneself from this type of infatuation and attachment of the heart, and from trials and tribulations, right? Then also there are other things which also aid and support that. And from them is the prayer, as-salat. As Allah Azza wa Jal said, inna as-salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar wala dhikrullahi akbar. Indeed, the prayer, it prevents from al-fahsha, doing shameful deeds, and from al-munkar, from evil, and wala dhikrullahi akbar. And indeed, the remembrance of Allah is greatest. So what we'll do, inshallah, is we'll stop our lesson at this point, and we'll follow up this discussion, this issue of the prayer, and ways to protect oneself from evil. We'll follow this discussion up, inshallah ta'ala, in the next lesson. But to summarize in today's lesson, basically today's lesson was about the heart's attachment to those things which are unlawful, by which one becomes infatuated. And this is a type of punishment, because it brings with it so many other types of evil and harms that come along with it. And that the way to save oneself, if a person falls into such a thing, is you take it from the example of Yusuf alayhi salam, and illustrating how his sincerity to Allah Azza wa Jal saved him and protected him from that moment of evil, and also exonerated him and his honor. And that ikhlas, sincerity to Allah, is a tremendous thing. It's a tremendous thing which saves a person from trials and calamities and hardships and so on and so forth, and also saves and delivers a person from trials and tribulations. And so we'll end our lesson there today, inshallah ta'ala, and we'll continue the discussion in the next lesson. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een.